Have you ever met someone who is so sure of themselves, so confident, yet clearly wrong? The coworker who dominates meetings with bizarre ideas that make no sense. The friend who watched one documentary and now thinks they're a political expert. Or worse, someone on social media arguing with a real scientist like they have a PhD. Why does this happen so often? Why do the least knowledgeable people often sound the most certain? What you're witnessing isn't just arrogance. It's a proven psychological bias called the Dunning-Kruger effect. Back in 1999, two psychologists, David Dunning and Justin Kruger, published a study that explained something disturbingly common. People who know the least about a subject are often the most confident about it. They don't realize how little they know, because the very skills required to understand a topic are also the ones you need to realize you don't understand it. It's not just ignorance, it's double ignorance. You're wrong, and you're unaware you're wrong. Let me ask you something real. Have you ever worked with someone who messed up a project but blamed everyone else? They never asked for help, never improved, and still insisted they were doing great. That's Dunning-Kruger in action. The effect was first inspired by a ridiculous true story. In 1995, a man named MacArthur Wheeler robbed two banks in Pittsburgh in broad daylight. No mask, no disguise. He rubbed lemon juice on his face and believed, seriously, that it made him invisible to security cameras. His logic? Lemon juice can be used as invisible ink, so it should hide his face. When police showed him the video footage, he was genuinely shocked. "I wore the juice," he said. He truly believed it would work. This wasn't a joke. This was a man so confident in a completely wrong belief that he committed a crime based on it. David Dunning, reading about the case, was fascinated. He wondered, how can someone be this wrong and still so sure? He partnered with his student Justin Kruger and designed a study. They tested people on humor, logic, and grammar, then asked them to rate how well they thought they did. What they found was shocking. The people who scored the worst also believed they were in the top 25%. They thought they were smarter, funnier, and more logical than most others. In reality, they were the bottom 25%. Meanwhile, the people who actually did well tended to underestimate themselves. It turns out, the smarter you are, the more you realize how much you don't know. And the less you know, the more you assume you've already figured it all out. Now stop and think. How many people around you fall into that second category? Maybe even, sometimes, yourself? This isn't just about psychology. It's about humility. It's about knowing the limits of your knowledge. And most importantly, it's about developing the courage to say, I don't know. So how does this strange effect actually work in the brain? Let's break it down. The Dunning-Kruger effect comes from a simple but dangerous truth. You need a certain level of skill to even realize what skill looks like. If you lack that basic understanding, you're not just bad at the task, you're bad at knowing that you're bad. Psychologists call this a metacognitive deficit. It means you can't accurately judge your own knowledge because you don't have enough knowledge to judge with. Let me give you an example. Imagine you're asked to evaluate a painting, something abstract and modern. You look at it and say, a child could do this. But an art expert sees layers of composition, technique, symbolism. You're not wrong to have an opinion, but you may not be equipped to recognize what you're missing. This is the core of the Dunning-Kruger trap, and it gets worse in real life. Let's say you start learning about investing. You read a few blogs, watch a couple of YouTube videos, and suddenly you're giving stock advice to your colleagues. You feel confident. But what you don't realize is that you're standing on what some call Mount Stupid, a false peak of confidence that happens when you've learned just enough to feel smart, but not enough to see the full complexity. True learning brings humility, because the more you learn, the more you see how little you actually know. This is why real experts often sound hesitant. They say things like, "it depends," or "we need more data." They're not unsure because they don't know. They're careful because they do. Let's look at a famous quote from philosopher Bertrand Russell. "The whole problem with the world is that fools and fanatics are always so certain of themselves, but wiser people so full of doubts." And now think back. Have you ever been in a team meeting where the loudest voice had the worst ideas, but no one could get a word in? That's the Dunning-Kruger effect in action, confidence outpacing competence. Even in medical fields, the effect shows up in dangerous ways. Studies found that medical students with the lowest diagnostic ability often rated themselves as above average. And worse, they were less likely to ask for second opinions. In the workplace, it's just as common. One study found that 95% of managers believed they were in the top 50% of performers. That's statistically impossible, but it's how Dunning-Kruger plays out. So ask yourself this: have you ever resisted feedback because deep down you feared hearing the truth? Have you ever defended a wrong decision longer than you should have because admitting fault would hurt your ego? We've all been there. That's the uncomfortable power of this effect. The more confident you feel, the less likely you are to question yourself. But here's the twist. The people who do question themselves constantly, they're usually the ones who are most capable. Now, let's zoom out for a moment. Because the Dunning-Kruger effect doesn't just live in your office or your family reunion, it lives online. It thrives on social media. In today's world, anyone can pick up a phone, read 3 articles, and suddenly feel like an expert, whether it's politics, medicine, psychology, or climate change. Confidence has never been more accessible. But here's the problem. Access to information is not the same as understanding. We live in the age of what some researchers call the death of expertise. Why? Because platforms like YouTube, Twitter, and TikTok reward certainty over complexity. The more confident and outrageous your opinion, the more likely it is to go viral. You've seen it. That person who shouts in a video about how doctors are lying, or the thread claiming they figured out the secret to the economy in 280 characters. Meanwhile, real experts are quietly saying, well, the data suggests multiple possibilities, and we must remain cautious. And guess who gets ignored? It's not that people are stupid. It's that our brains are wired to prefer clarity over nuance, confidence over caution. Let me ask you something. Have you ever believed something strongly just because it felt right, even if you couldn't explain it? That's how the Dunning-Kruger effect plays out in everyday life. In our group chats, our job interviews, our dinner conversations. And the scariest part? It doesn't affect everyone equally across the world. Culture plays a huge role. In Western cultures, especially in the US, people are raised to be confident. From school, we're taught to believe in yourself, to speak up, to own the room. Sounds empowering, right? But this constant encouragement of self-esteem, often without equally teaching self-assessment, creates the perfect storm for overconfidence. Studies have shown that American students routinely rate themselves higher than average, even when their actual performance is below average. It's not arrogance, it's programming. Now contrast that with East Asian cultures like Japan or Korea. There, humility is a virtue. Self-criticism is seen as strength, not weakness. Students are less likely to overestimate themselves and more open to feedback. That's not to say one culture is better than another, but it shows how the Dunning-Kruger effect is shaped by the environment. It's not just a psychological bug, it's a social condition. So next time you're scrolling and see a person ranting with total certainty, pause and ask yourself, do they really know what they're talking about? Or are they just standing on Mount Stupid with a Wi-Fi connection? Let's be honest. The Dunning-Kruger effect isn't just some quirky mental bias. When it plays out in the real world, the consequences can be dangerous. It affects elections, healthcare, education, and even the way we raise our children. In the workplace, for example, how often have you seen someone get promoted, not because they're competent, but because they're confident? That manager who talks a big game, dominates meetings, but actually causes more harm than good. This is what researchers call a confidence cascade. When overconfident people rise in organizations, they change the culture. Suddenly, it's no longer about who has the best ideas. It's about who sounds most certain. And in time, the whole system starts rewarding loud voices over wise ones. Let's take a more personal example. Imagine you're at a family dinner. Your uncle, after watching a single YouTube video, claims vaccines are a scam. He speaks with such conviction that half the table starts nodding. Meanwhile, your cousin, a medical student, tries to explain mRNA technology. But she's cautious, uses words like statistical significance and peer-reviewed data. Guess who wins the room? The Dunning-Kruger effect thrives in situations like this, because certainty feels better than complexity. And in the absence of critical thinking, confidence becomes contagious. But this doesn't mean confidence is bad. In fact, we need it to move forward in life, to speak up, to try, to fail, and try again. The problem is misplaced confidence, confidence that's not backed by skill, knowledge, or reflection. So what can we do? First, let's admit something. We are all vulnerable, and yes, you too, me too. The Dunning-Kruger effect is not about other people being dumb. It's about the human tendency to overestimate what we know, especially in areas we know little about. As writer Maria Popova says, critical thinking without hope is cynicism, but hope without critical thinking is naive. We need both. The courage to ask, do I actually understand this? And the humility to say, maybe I don't. Second, seek feedback, not just from friends who agree with you, but from people who challenge you, who know more, who've been there. Feedback isn't always comfortable, but it's how we grow. Third, practice epistemic humility. It's a fancy term that means, I know some things, I don't know everything, and I'm okay with that. It's what the wisest people in history all had in common. Not blind certainty, but a relationship with uncertainty. As Socrates said, the only true wisdom is in knowing you know nothing. And if that sounds depressing, it shouldn't. Because when we stop pretending to know it all, we actually become open to learning. That's not weakness. That's real strength.